Let's do a quick walkthrough of our activity. Now I'm going to take a shortcut here since I know we need to rename this file ultimately, so I'm going to rename it now. Now it's just me, so I'm just going to put my own net ID. If you and your partner were working together, you'd put the partner's net ID here as well. So if I were working with Wilbur Wildcat, that's what I do, but it's just me. So I'm going to rename it, and then I'm going to open up my access file. If you get a security warning, just go ahead and say enable content. So first step is we've got, what you'll see is we've got 2019 data, and we also have data for other years, but they're in separate files. So you see this one ends, and then this one begins, which is frequently the case. You'll often have in business, you'll have existing data and you'll have to append new data as it becomes available for each quarter, each month, each region, or and so on. So here's our query that's we're going to use to start with. It's partly put together, but we'll need to do a few things. Now, the first thing we have to do is a join. So what you'll see here is if I look at this query as is, right, it's got a lot of rows in here. And that really doesn't make sense because if I were to look at one of the underlying tables, right, so if I were to go, let's say, and look at my actual data for this year, there's only a few hundred rows. And so with that, we really shouldn't be getting like thousands of results. And the reason is this, without a join, is doing what's known as a Cartesian product. Cartesian product is going to take each one of the rows in this table and link it to every one of the rows in this current table, right? And you're just going to get a lot of data. Oops, sorry, got the wrong one there. Every one of the rows in this table, and you're going to get a very large result set. So let's go ahead and close these source tables and let's do a join. So there's a few different ways you can do the join. We're going to do a simple way. Take the join column, which in this case happens to be the same name, the unit code, and link them up. So drag it from here on top of here. Once you see the join and you actually go and view the data, you see it's cut down to a number that looks a lot more familiar. All right. Now that's the first step. The other is we want to append this to the existing data in here. So we're going to go back in here, go to our design, and we're going to do this append button. As soon as you hit the append button in your design ribbon, it's going to say which table. We're going to pick our table, say OK, right? Just go ahead and save it at this point just to be safe. And then let's go ahead and run it. Okay, and it's going to give you a warning. Are you sure you want to add those rows? And be like, yep, that was a goal. So we'll say OK. And we'll close that query. We're kind of done with it. Notice it's changed the little icon because now it's an append query. But just to be sure that it worked, let's go back to our table. And now you see we've got the data for the latest year in there. Okay, so that was the first step of the first query. Now we're going to go ahead and work with our next query. So we're going to go ahead and create a new query. And we're going to add the tables that we want, right? And we're going to either you can double click or hit add, select, and hit add, and select and hit add. And if you want, you're particular about reorganizing things, you can relay them out to make it look a little nicer so you can see, oh, okay, the visits links to the park data, which links to the states. But um, let's get to the actual data we want. So from park data, we want our unit code. We also want our unit name, and we want a state. And then we also want states from here. Now you might be like, well, why do I want that twice? Well, if you want to look at it, you'll see one is the 2-letter code versus one is the full name. So that also gives us a hint as to how we might want to rename it, because if we don't rename it, it's just going to put that table prefix. It's not very helpful in some sense. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this, right? And now if I were to view it, be like, oh, okay, that's what each has. Okay, so we're not done yet. We also want the year and the visitors. And we also want to do a little bit of a rename. This is the data as we got from the source, had a name. We don't particularly care for it, so we're going to rename it, right? And we also want to do a little more filtering. So we want to make sure we're only getting those parks that have a name. So we're going to say is not null. So if you were to look at the source data, just to kind of give you a sense, and you see some of these have null values, empty values. Null is a technical term for empty, and we don't want those, right? We also want more recent data, so we're going to filter by year. And we want to skip those rows where the visit data is 0, or maybe it was closed for maintenance or some other problem. So we don't want that data. So we're going to filter out our data here. Once you're done with the filter, if you want to sort of test it, go ahead, take a look, make sure you're getting the data that you want, right? Then go ahead back to design view, just double check, compare with the instructions so you have everything. And then I'm going to right click here and do save, right? And it's just me, so I'm just only going to use my own net ID and hit OK, right? And what we want to do here is not just query, but actually make a new table out of this data set, because this data set's then going to be the foundation for some other queries for us. Um, and partly we want to illustrate that you can do that. So earlier we saw how you can, add data. Now we're going to actually add a whole new table, right? So we're going to, on our design ribbon, make table. At that point, it's going to ask you for the name of the table. So go ahead and enter that. All right, and hit OK. Once more, save it. Okay, and then run. When you do that, it's going to ask, are you sure you want this new table? We'll say yes, and you see that table just showed up. So I'm going to go ahead and close that query and just make sure that this table looks good. Open it up, check out the data, make sure you've got everything in there. All right, once you're convinced that all is well, we'll go ahead and make a third query up here, right? So once more, go ahead, create, query design. This time we're going to use the recent table that we added, then say close, right? And we actually want every column. Now don't hit the asterisk here for every column. We're going to do individually list these out, and you'll see in a moment why. And that is because we want to do a filtering. So earlier we looked at a couple of different kinds of filters, right? So if you go here, you see we did is not null, we did a greater than 0, greater than equal to, and of course there's variations of that. Now we're going to do a filter on text, but before we actually get there, as always, I like saving my work. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And now that that's there, you see this has got all the parks in here, but maybe I don't want every park for a variety of reasons. I just want to cut it down. So I'm going to cut it down to 5 now. As you'll see in the instructions, you'll have to choose your own parks. Okay, and if you're not sure which ones, just open up park data, scroll through, you've got names in here, pick ones that you like. You can reuse a couple, but you have to have at least 3 new ones. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put my criteria here. This is essentially saying I want it to be one of these. This is Petrified Forest, Montezuma's Castle. And again, you might not remember these codes offhand, so you might have to just go back into the park data, scroll down, pick the ones you like. All right, so and but once you get that, get the unit code, because that's what you're going to be filtering on. All right, and we're going to say Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, um, and Canyon Duché. All right. Okay, so double check your work always. Make sure you didn't miss a step. Don't just count on my having written everything correctly. I can make mistakes, so make sure you don't make mistakes. All right. So we're going to save this and then close it. And once we are done that, we're actually going to export this to Excel. And now Access, especially when you have large data sets, is much more efficient in terms of working with data. Here we're still doing manageable amount of data, but as your data sets get larger, sometimes you'll want to do the pre-processing in Access or some other database before doing any analytics in Excel. All right, so right-click, export Excel. I'm going to use a local folder. because occasionally if you have a shared drive or something, it'll give you errors. So if you have some errors, just go ahead and use a local. I mean by that I mean on your local hard disk, little computer. We'll go ahead and say OK. Right, close that, and then before we close up access, let's go ahead and compact and repair that database, and then we're going to close that access database up. If you didn't remember to rename your file earlier, make sure you do that now. Speaking of renaming it, renaming files, I'm going to go ahead and rename this Excel file just so I don't forget. Okay. Um, Obviously, I'm not on step 5, but I'm just renaming it because sometimes I have a tendency to forget things. All right, so I've done that renaming. Now, what's going to happen is these are the parks that we exported. I'm going to make a table out of this data. And if you've forgotten how to do that, you can use the keyboard shortcut Control-T in Windows or hit Insert and not pivot table, hit table, and you see there's that keyboard shortcut. So go ahead and do that. It should automatically select the correct range. If you want to be safe, you can double check. Hit OK. Now we're going to add a whole new column here, and that's going to allow us to do a visit comparison, right? So we're going to call it visit comparison. And the formula here is similar to something we've done before in a previous activity. And basic idea is if this record is more than the average of the entire column, then we'll say high visits, otherwise so greater than equal to the average high, otherwise low. So we're going to say if this value is greater than equal to average of the entire column. Now remember the at the rate of is for the current value. But if I want the entire column, I don't put at the rate of, right? And I just put the entire column name in square brackets. Now to avoid errors, I'll just double click here. So that way I don't do a typo. Close square brackets, close parentheses for average. Now if it is greater than the average or greater than equal to the average, we're going to say high visits, right? And then otherwise low. All right. Okay, and the nice thing about the table is you enter the formula in one cell, it populates all the way. Okay, so now that that's done, we're going to insert our pivot table. So click anywhere in the data, go ahead and press the insert ribbon, pivot table. Okay, insert pivot table right here. And once you do that, it should automatically select the entire table. We'll go ahead and say okay. Now in this first pivot table, we're going to get the sort of the park name, and we also want the average of the visitors, right? So we're going to show visitors. By default, it's going to be a sum, and it's going to be, it's not going to be easy to read. I'm going to make this comma formatted so that I can see if it's tens of thousands, hundreds, millions. So I'm going to go back to the home ribbon, comma. Now these numbers are a little bit easier to read. And then we want to change the sum to average. There's a few different ways to do that. You can click on the sum of visitors and do value field settings, come here, and right click and do summarize values with average, or come here, go to pivot table analyze, go to field settings, right, switch to average. Whatever way you do it, just make sure you get it done. Now don't be alarmed that these are not the parks you're looking at, because I just worked with my own little data set. You should be having different data over here. All right, so and once I've got that in place, I want to do a little more in terms of filtering just to show you how we can do filtering. So what we do is we do a drop down here, okay, and we're going to do a value filter and pick top 10. All right, so just go ahead and do that drop down. Even though it says top 10, right, don't be alarmed. It will allow us to pick top 3. It's just that's the name of the filter, okay? So do top 10 right there. And of course, we don't want 10, we want 3. So we're going to say okay, right? And you can, just verify, you kind of expect, which ones you're going to see. But then when you filter it, you should be down to those parks. All right, again, double check the instructions to make sure you didn't miss a step or miss anything, or I didn't miss anything for that matter. And now we're going to insert our second pivot table. So back to a data, pivot table, and we're going to say, okay, this one's going to be looking a little different. We're going to see years down over here. We're going to see our parks over here, and then, put the average in there, right? So just to show you something like a little different in some sense, right? Um, and I'm going to drag the visitors over here. All right. And once more, if it's by default it's a sum, you can change it to the average. You can reformat it, all of those good things. And let's go ahead and do that while we're here. Home and just hit the comma, right? And then what we want to do is put a pivot chart. So click on the pivot table analyze. Don't just do a regular chart, right? And hit a pivot chart. And we're going to choose a line chart. Okay, so and that's going to sort of show us the trends. Say okay, right? You can move it around a little bit so it's easy to see. And what we're also going to do is add a chart title. Okay, so go ahead and hit the little plus sign here, chart title, and put your net ID in place. All right. Okay, so just to make sure I didn't miss anything, you should double check the steps and submit both your files for this activity. And as always, it's great practice to save and close your files before you submit.